We've started to see regulators try and enforce more punitive legislation as part of their regulatory controls. So historically, we have seen financial penalties, we've seen announcements that have meant that brands have been damaged, but more recently we've started to see individual liabilities put into place so that the C-suite is now accountable directly for data breaches and data compromises.
Yeah, I think up until now, most companies have thought that regulators might give them a slap on the wrist, a small fine, and that would be the end of it. But I think if you just do a few Googles, you'll see where we've got chief execs of companies that have been held personally liable. The most famous one recently in Finland with Vestama, a psychotherapy company, where the chief exec decided that the network security team could deal with all of their security needs. Now, obviously, as a psychotherapy company, they had a lot of personal identifying information of their clients. And unfortunately for them, when they were breached, all of that was released to the internet. Now, the chief exec told the regulator that network security was dealing with that. The regulator, unfortunately, decided that the chief exec was negligent in his duty to protect his business and his business's clients, and gave him a 3-month suspended jail sentence, which led to that chief exec being fired. And apart from all of the legal cases brought by the clients against Vestama, they eventually went into bankruptcy and were bought by their nearest competitor. So that business died because they decided that network security was sufficient to protect their organization, when in actual fact it was the data that the people were after.
Yeah, I was really interested to read a few weeks ago that actually John Chambers, the ex-CEO of Cisco, has now come forward and said that he expects, like we have maintained for a period of time, he expects CEOs and the wider C-suite to actually become more and more accountable for their organizations when it comes to protecting sensitive data. So with what Certes is pioneering around data protection and risk mitigation, enabling organizations to fully take control of their data security posture, irrespective of how they're using technology, whether it's on-prem, whether it's managed, hosted environments, being able to maintain ownership and control of their data, irrespective of where it goes geographically, is something that's going to very much help that C-suite keep themselves from personal liabilities associated with regulatory non-conformance.
Yeah, and this is where DPRM comes into play, because this is really not a technology play. This is a business risk mitigation, that the chief execs have two choices. They either accept there's a risk and do nothing about it and potentially become negligent, or they decide that is a business risk that can be mitigated by a technology suite like DPRM and bring that to bear, protecting their data, protecting their business going forward, and removing that risk from the table.
Yeah, and interestingly, the thing that Certes leads with when it's talking about DPRM is the fact that it is around business risk and risk mitigation. We're not talking about technology, although the foundation of what DPRM delivers is a technological capability within the environment. It's very much associated with how does the organization ensure that they maintain that ownership and control of sensitive data in a way where it mitigates the risk associated with regulatory non-compliance or non-conformance. So it's really a way where our partners, Certes and our partners, can elevate conversations within customers away from infrastructure or infrastructure security teams up to the C-suite to be able to have meaningful conversations around business risk and business risk mitigation.
And I think the whole area of data protection is a difficult area. Data protection legal terms make it really difficult to not be involved in the whole process. Mm-hmm. And you can't fix a data problem with an infrastructure solution. They just do not work together. So DPRM has been put in place to be the data-centric version of what SASE is to infrastructure.
So one of the challenges with introducing another term is that we see the C-suite already consumed with a number of technology terms within their organizations. So DPRM, they've had SASE, they've had SSE, they've had SD-WAN. So how is it that DPRM is providing something different for the CISOs or for the C-suite within an organization that handles regulated or sensitive data?
Well, for the last 20 years, the network and network security teams have controlled all of the infrastructure security. Everything around the business was perimetered by the network security team. Unfortunately, that didn't deal with the data that was flowing over that infrastructure. And that's really the crown jewels of the organization. And the data protection officer or the chief information security officer within that business is charged with protecting that data. But they have no tools, or had no tools, with which to protect that data other than infrastructure, such as SASE and SSE. DPRM gives them the tools to put business rules in the form of policies around that data to protect the most important and sensitive data that organization deals with, no matter what network infrastructure it goes over. That frees them from worrying about particular patching on firewalls or particular service providers they're using, or maybe cloud vendors, because it doesn't matter what infrastructure it travels over. They know that they are the only ones in control of that data, and only their intended recipients can see that data.
I think also what's really important to note is when we talk to our partners, whether they're our alliance partners or our go-to-market partners, it's become very evident very quickly that the C-suite is not used to having conversations with technology vendors. Typically, their conversations are around risk and risk mitigation. However, when we start looking at infrastructure and infrastructure-related controls, CISOs and DPOs are looking at how do they ensure that the infrastructure controls are patched to a level that all high-ranking risks or vulnerabilities within those technologies are mitigated so that their perimeter stays intact. However, with DPRM, we're enabling our partners, our alliance partners, to go in and have a more meaningful discussion around risk and risk mitigation rather than their technology and how their technology is performing from an infrastructure perspective. So with DPRM, it's a conversation starter. It's a narrative that's really meaningful because it's proactive around how do we put you in a position that's in the best position possible to protect your data proactively in terms of regulation, rather than how do we make sure you can react quickly enough to ensure that any breach isn't an estate-wide breach, and therefore opening up the crown jewels to being compromised from a single breach.
Yeah, and I think most infrastructure discussions or procurement discussions these days, it's purely price. It's not on value. It's not on the importance to the business. Whereas DPRM is a completely different approach to this. It's taking the business's perspective of what's important to them, not what infrastructure do they need with which to transact their business. So we're actually talking to the businesses in their terms, not in technology terms. We're talking about a risk that they have, whether they understand that or not. That risk is clear and present. They have to mitigate that risk. And DPRM is a very simple, transparent way for them to apply that mitigation into their existing systems without a complete re-architecture or upheaval of what they've had for a long time. And infrastructure security is required. You wouldn't leave the front door of your house open, for example, but you also need to protect the data that's on the other side of that infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that point you make is really, really important around the risk is there. Whether they choose to acknowledge it or whether to mitigate that risk, what can't be is down to them. But what can't be argued is the risk there or not? So what's really important there is when we start talking to organisations about DPRM, it's about mitigating a risk that's there. So when it comes to things like budgets, do we have the money to do this? In short, do we have the money to not do this? Because the cost of doing nothing is actually now very punitive financially. Obviously, we've already talked about the brand damage that occurs from regulatory non-conformance, and even more so now, the C-suite becoming personally liable for compromises within their organisations means that the cost of doing nothing is now very, very severe.